Well, it's finally happened. After all these years, Apple has finally announced the iPhone 15 series with USB-C. It's been a long time coming, and it would have been even longer if Apple had its way. They have been reluctant to introduce this feature for so many years now. But this time, Apple's hand was forced, and they did it out of compulsion. Samsung, their biggest competitor, introduced it 7 years ago, but now finally, Apple is joining the party. Now this doesn't seem like a particularly easy choice by Apple, although they were the first popular company to introduce it into their laptops, and even on their iPads, they still never wanted it on their iPhones. Well, think about it. They introduced the MacBook and they said you wouldn't need any other port, and that this would be the only port you'd ever need, and they stuck to their guns for so long. Still, Apple has had the USB-C port on all of their mainline products, except for the iPhone, and that was until recently. Now why is that? Well, I can think of 3 reasons, and these reasons make me inclined to side with them a little bit. So let's start with the most obvious one, which is their intellectual property that they had with the Lightning port. They sell so many iPhones, and as a result, even more accessories. So as far as business models go, this one's a pretty solid one. Now why would they want to give up the opportunity to sell you even more accessories, especially when it makes them so much money? And I don't think there's any company in the world that hates making money. Now on to the second reason, which is what Apple promotes the most. Apple has introduced this USB-C because of the new laws passed in the European Union, and their view is that these laws will hamper innovation, handicapping the ability of the companies to innovate. As a result, they will not be able to ship you a connector that can give you better charging, better data transfer, and so much more with just that one connector. And until this law is either revoked or updated, their hands would be tied. The technological advancement that has been so speedy since the start of 2000s will have a sudden speed bump in its way. Out of all the phone manufacturers, Apple stands to lose the most because in the era of corporate buzzwords, Apple thrives on the word innovation. This word resonates most with the company's fan base, and this is one loyal fan base too. Now just because of this, Apple will have to create a whole new marketing campaign. And since they can no longer rely on the narrative that they have been building for so many years now, all that effort's been wasted. This little change, this little USB-C has removed one of the major differences between iPhone and its competitors. Their slogan, "Think Different," has been crushed. When they had the Lightning port, their accessories had to be custom built for devices. They wouldn't work for any other phone in the world. Now, this was a huge thing for Apple, because even when your phone wasn't showing, the accessories were. And those same accessories would help in marketing the iPhone and Apple to the people. They were making iPhone and Apple the lifestyle product, the lifestyle company that it always aspired to be, which it sort of had become. Now though, it's all gone. The ecosystem that Apple has put so many years into building has all gone to waste. Their walled garden doesn't have walls anymore. Admittedly, this wasn't the only protection that Apple had created for itself. Apple still has its software, its hardware, and its industry-leading brand recognition. But the Lightning port, although little, was very important. Maybe even more important than we can imagine in making a bank for the company. Now, this isn't the first time they've done this. They have changed the ports on their iPhones before, but that was for a different reason. Now, whatever that reason may be, they know the nightmare that will ensue once they make their old port obsolete. So much hardware will find its way to the dumps, just because it can no longer work with the newer versions of the iPhone. So many people will switch to the newer iPhones, and in the coming years, this number will continue to grow, leading this to undoubtedly become an environmental nightmare. Now keep in mind that iPhones are one of the best-selling smartphones in the world, with sales figures crossing millions, if not billions. And with so many iPhones in the wild, there are bound to be even more accessories than the iPhones themselves. Therefore, this new law passed from the EU has the potential to become the new Cobra effect. And there's no effective framework that will enable us to deal with such a situation. Furthermore, it will also create another problem, maybe an even bigger problem for Apple, because their logo, which has been the sign of luxury, could ultimately end up becoming the sign of junkyards. It has the potential to shift the brand image of Apple that is associated with so much positivity to unprecedented negativity. And there's no company in the world that would like to be in such a situation, especially not a company as big as Apple. Now try putting yourself in the shoes of people like Steve Jobs or Tim Cook. How would it feel to see your life's legacy be reduced to junk just like that? Now this brings me to the third reason why Apple was reluctant to put USB-C on their iPhones. That being that this will turn their iPhones into pieces of junk, but in another sense of the word. Because you see, the proprietary connector was a huge line of defense against malware and viruses. It was basically the biggest line of defense when it came to the device's security. It allowed only a select number of devices to be connected to the phone, which reduced the threat of security breaches by a huge factor. Now USB-C, being as common as it is, would allow so many devices to connect to the iPhone, and the security of the phone would be greatly compromised. Now, historically speaking, iPhone has been considered a very secure device. Now, this perception may be right and it may be wrong, but that perception was very important. It was integral to Apple and its users. Now, though, it's gone. Therefore, I can predict a huge influx of viruses and malware infecting the iOS devices. Now you may be wondering that this USB-C is not new to Apple. It has been present in MacBooks and iPads. So why would it be such a problem in the iPhone? Well, the reason is that iPhones are the largest market shareholders of any Apple product right now. Most Apple users are iPhone users. They might be using the iPhone, but it's not a guarantee that they will be using a MacBook or an iPad. The number of MacBook and iPad users is so much lower than the iPhone users. So in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter if a few devices have been infected. It can be swept under the rug very easily. But if the iPhones start to get infected, it would be a very difficult thing to just ignore like that. I've been talking about marketing, but the engineering department will also have to go into overdrive. Unless they mitigate this issue, it could become a huge problem. And this access may give rise to another problem for Apple. Because of the inclusion of the USB-C, sideloading apps might become possible. If you didn't know already, Apple doesn't want you to sideload your apps because it wants you to use their app store. That's where their huge chunk of money comes from. iPhone sales, while huge, have slowed down in the last few years, and Apple is increasingly relying on its users to use the App Store, including their affiliated services, in order to offset the slowing number of sales of the hardware. But just like that, that revenue stream is poof, gone. So the consumer might be very happy to see this change in the iPhone. But as Apple, the company that makes the iPhone, it is a very difficult choice to make. Even as a consumer, the environmental and security issues might not be as beneficial to me in the long run. Another reason for iPhone's slower adoption of the USB-C might just be the word innovation. Because you see, as many fans of Apple would point out, Apple likes to take their sweet time to roll out a new product, even if it's not really a new product, just because they wanted to give it that Apple touch. When compared to the Android, the iOS user interface is so much more intuitive. It is easier to understand and easier to follow. It's light years ahead of its competition. Most of the features that Apple introduces follow either the "it just works" mantra or magic mantra. Take the punch hole cutout camera for example. Now, punch hole is not a very new concept. There are many other competitors that have used punch holes for their front cameras on their phones. But when Apple launched its punch hole camera, it gave it a new name. It made it a dynamic island. Now the optimist in me wants to think that Apple was slow to adopt USB-C because it wanted to add that extra magic, that extra Apple feature that just works on the iPhone. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you'd like more updates like these, stay tuned.